Welcome to AI in Learning, a series that unites today's most forward-thinking voices in learning and artificial intelligence. Together, we'll explore not just what's changing, but what it means for how people learn, grow, and stay relevant. Each conversation goes beyond the trends and buzzwords to understand real shifts that are happening in skills, tools, and mindsets that are shaping the future of learning at work. All right, welcome back to AI in Learning, everybody. Again, my name is Justin Seeley. Joining me this time is Donald H. Taylor, one of the most respected voices in learning and development. Donald spent decades helping organizations navigate the changing world of workplace learning, from his leadership as chair of the Learning Technologies Conference in London to his work as an author, speaker, and industry analyst. But I think perhaps what he's best known for is the Global Sentiment Survey, the annual snapshot of L&D professionals around the world and how they're feeling about the future of learning. It's become one of the most trusted barometers in our field and giving us a glimpse into the priorities, hopes, and challenges that are shaping how people learn at work. So, Donald, thank you so much for joining me today.
Great to be here, Justin.
All right, well, let's get into it. As I said in the introduction, you've been tracking global L&D trends for years now. So, what first motivated you to start the Global Sentiment Survey, and what keeps you inspired to keep doing it every year?
In my long time in the industry, I've seen fads come and go, from laser discs through to wearables through to AI, and it's always fascinated me to ask myself which ones are going to stick, which ones won't, and what happens after the hype dies away. And those are the questions I try to answer on the Global Sentiment Survey.
And is that kind of what keeps you, like, the new things that are coming out all the time? Obviously, we're in an era of, innovation and explosion with AI and everything else. Is that really kind of keeping you with your teeth sunken into this going forward?
It's an extraordinary time, Justin. It really is. As I say, I've seen things come and go, but I don't think AI is a fad, and I don't think that it is something which is going to go. It's going to just permeate into everything we do and become the background and the tool that we use. And I'm not just talking about generative AI, but about the ability to process large amounts of data very quickly at scale, which underlies really all of AI. It's a very general term, which probably goes well beyond AI itself. But that power is something which is transforming our lives in ways that we can't even begin to imagine what's going to happen, and ways we completely underestimate that it's already affecting our lives.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I tell people that all the time, that we're really at the infancy stage of all of this, where we're very easily distracted by bells and whistles, right? Because we see the things that generative AI can do. Those are certainly impressive, but those are by no means what I believe will ultimately be the true benefit and value of artificial intelligence as we move forward. I see those as being nice to haves, but I don't see those as being, like you said, the backbone of how it's actually going to transform, especially what we do in L&D.
If you think about electricity as an example in the 19th century, right at the beginning of the 19th century, Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein on the basis of having seen travelling showmen put electricity through frogs in village halls. Now, that's a long way away from the actual industrial adoption of electricity almost a century later. But that was the sort of bells and whistles you're talking about, that exciting, oh my goodness, look at this crazy thing, that got people both excited and scared. And we're seeing that same thing now with AI.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think, you've talked to so many professionals around the world. What's the one thing that consistently surprises you about how people feel about AI in learning today? What's the word on the street, so to speak?
Well, what surprises me about how people in LD are looking at AI is how they underestimate it. And they see it as being a tool that they can use to do the old things faster or cheaper or better. Well, it's not even better necessarily. You can use it for that for sure, but I look at how technology is adopted, for example, with music, and how we've gone from listening when I was a kid to a transistor radio in your bedroom to having a boombox, which just was a really big, loud transistor radio, to a Walkman, to an iPod, and how at each stage you were doing the same sort of thing. But if you look at an iPod versus a transistor radio, it is a transformational revolution, and that's the beginning point of the next revolution, of changes in how music is shared, streamed, and so on. At the moment, we're looking at AI, typically in L&D, as if it was a boombox, as if it was something that enabled us to do what we already do a bit louder. But it is a lot more than that, and there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. I think it's a natural phase in understanding of technology, but it doesn't stop there, and it won't stop there. And I think what surprises me is how people are thinking like that, and not everybody. There are some people who are really seeing the benefits that can come from AI, and also, as well, and it's important to say this, the challenges that it represents.
Yeah, and I like that metaphor of especially from going, like, from boombox to iPod and things like that. I often, when I'm talking to relatives who ask me to explain it to them, I often reference the iPhone, especially when my mother asks me about it, right? It's like, "Mom, it's like your life before iPhone or being able to talk to your Amazon device or life after that," right? And until we find that level of integration and we remove the friction of AI to get to that iPhone level of usability, I think that's ultimately where we need to get to in order for this to be something people are comfortable with. But I'm curious, like, do you feel like people's attitudes are evolving more positively as we get more accessible, like, more towards this iPhone-ish type usability? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Definitely people are positive about it, but of course we have to be always careful, Justin, because I tend to talk to people who are naturally going to be enthusiastic about this stuff. And so I'm always dealing with a population that is skewed. That
Sure.
population this year moved for the first time. I did a survey with Eglevin Skyton, my co-author. AI in L&D has moved this year where our surveyed population shifted to more than 50% of them using AI regularly in their work from last year. It was a very substantial and very clear shift. That doesn't mean everybody's doing that. And I do a lot of work traveling around talking to people. So a couple of weeks ago, I was in Bratislava talking to a small number of people who, in a small country, who are keen to use AI well, but who are working in an environment where traditionally face-to-face training is still very much what is expected. And there they are seeing a pushback against it. They are finding it difficult in some places to get AI used, even though they want to do it. So we shouldn't fool ourselves that just because of the 600 people we surveyed from 50 countries, more than half of them were using AI, doesn't mean everybody is. And it's a bit like a cycle race. There's a peloton out front, people are leading the way, and in that peloton, there's lots of exciting stuff happening. The back is where most of the runners are, and they are well behind the exciting stuff that's being done at the front. It's nothing new. This is how technology gets adopted. But it'll be interesting to see what the people right at the front choose to do with AI. And I think some of those people are going to do things which are transformational, going well beyond that boombox to something completely new. I'm seeing it happening. It's exciting. I suspect that other people at the back of the pack aren't going to be able to keep up.
So I'm curious, I wanna dig a little deeper on that or pull that thread a little bit more there because you said that over 50% of people said they're using it in their work. What do they mean by using it in their work? Is it purely the generative things like we're talking about, or are they using, agents, chatbots? Like, what's the main way that people seem to be using it practically in L&D today?
So we ask people to talk about how they're using AI in two different ways. One is just to choose things from a list in a multiple choice question, and the other is to write to us and tell us what they're doing. Now, if you look at the answers to the multiple choice question, it's all focused on content, or largely focused on content. So the top thing they say is, I'm using it for creating learning content. I'm using it for learning design tasks. I'm using it for admin. I'm using it for researching subject matter. Those are the top four things. And it's all about effectively content or doing what you're doing at the moment more effectively. The other, as well as content and design, the other three things that we put into buckets that all of these responses is operational stuff. So just doing your day job better, strategy, which really revolves around data analysis, and workforce enablement, which is a lot of stuff around personalization, practice, and support. Now, these things are all being done. And if you compare the results of the checklist survey this year against last year's survey, there's almost no change. They're in almost exactly the same order. There's one change. Quantitative data analysis has moved up from 5th position to 5th position this year, from 8th position last year. Now, that's a small change, it's one thing, but it tells a story. So if we go from the checklist to that free text box, where we ask people, what are you doing with AI? And we look at that, we do two sorts of analysis on that. We just count words and we look at how many times certain words appear, and we go and do a deep dive into analysing it, looking at it, and really understanding what people are saying. There are 20,000 words here, so if you've read a novella recently, like Kafka's Metamorphosis, which is a crazy tale of a man turning into an insect, if you look at that, that's about 20,000 words long. And so we're reading a book, really, of stuff here. When you do that, those 4 categories show that there's quite a lot of quite sophisticated stuff going on that's bubbling up in ways that aren't apparent in the checkbox approach, in the multiple choice question. So if you look at, for example, the question about content and design, there's a shift in how people are working with subject matter experts. They're not going to talk to subject matter experts to understand everything they can to do to begin with. They're using AI to brief them, to get an idea, to set up questions, and then going to the SME with that information in hand. So they're better briefed in advance. In fact, in some cases, there's one legal company in Manchester in the UK which has a local large language model which contains all of the information that that legal practice has created. It is a knowledge repository. By going and quizzing that, the L&D team is able to understand a huge amount of the subject matter expertise and then just go to the subject matter experts. In a legal company, they're very expensive, and just get their insight on particular points rather than having to go to get a huge brief. So what's happening there is that we're moving from doing the same thing bigger, the boombox bit, a little bit more towards the Walkman phase. We're doing the old thing in a new way. We're not going and quizzing SMEs with the same amount of background being needed. We know the background. We're going to them for some detail. And actually, that's a thread that continues throughout the content and design bit, which is that people are using AI to approach content and to create it in different ways, often in a much more iterative way. So classic case is video production, which used to be, well, you need to have a film crew come in, it's going to take you several days, and that's it. That's become a much more iterative process where you create artificial video. You just check with your people, does this make sense? Yes, no, that's wrong, check this, I like that. And it's a much faster, iterative process to get into an end product, which also, by the way, is much cheaper. That's definitely well beyond the boombox. That's doing the old thing in a very new way. I could go on. There's lots more information I've got about how people are using it, but I think that focus on the content and design piece is a really interesting way in which superficially it's being used the same way. Underneath it, there's a growth in different ways of doing things, which I think shows some sophistication on the part of L&D.
Yeah, I think anywhere that you can get a true efficiency gain from this, something that's tangible that you can put, a statistic towards like that, that's ultimately where people are going to see the biggest amount of, at least in the short term, ROI. I can relate this back to the job that I had previous to Adobe, where we were doing, I worked for a big box retailer, and we were doing education for their sellers that were on their marketplace. And one of the jobs was we had to produce all of this video content. Well, we had one person that was doing the voiceover for these videos, and then we were shooting the videos as screen capture. We transitioned to an AI voiceover system, and we also transitioned to an AI first video creator that would take PowerPoint slides and animate them for you and things like that, right? So we were able to increase production by about 200% over that, not to mention the fact that we could also use the same AI to translate into multiple languages. So we were instantly global. And that was a huge win for our team because we were 5, 6 people, all in the United States. And all of a sudden we were a global content team. So that's the type of things that I think people will truly start to see like big, wins from when they first start, going.
Exactly. You've described two separate things there which are interesting. One is doing the old thing in a slightly more efficient way. Well, actually, much more efficient way. And the other is you're able now to do new things, which you weren't able to do before, the translation piece, simply because you can press a button. Is it perfect? No, but it is today almost always good enough. And you can have it checked if you want to. So I think that's a really good example of how AI is transforming the whole content and design piece right now. Interestingly, when we look at the words that people use when they're describing how they're using AI, we track not just words, but the stems of words. So if we count the number of times that people have used that word, how many comments in which that word is used, we find that there are some words which this year have hit the top 10, which were nowhere 3 years ago. And the three keywords for which that's the case are analysis, data, and research. So they've come into the top 10 from 28th position, 37th position, in the case of research, 53rd position. So 3 years ago, actually 2 years ago, in 23, it was 53rd, now it's number 10. So there's a lot of stuff going on underneath that surface of we're creating content. Yes, you are, but doing it in, I think, a different and more sophisticated way.
Very interesting. Those numbers are very, very interesting considering how far those terms jumped up. Um, I think, one of the other things though that when I go out and I speak to clients, customers of Adobe and things like that, we get a lot of trepidation with AI. A lot of people are still very cautious about it because they've heard, it might replace me or it might do this or might hallucinate, whatever the case might be. But, like, when somebody's getting started in an organization is getting started with AI, what is a small experiment that you think that they should try first? Like, where should they begin when they first make the decision, "Okay, we're going to use AI for something." What is that something?
The best place to start is in an efficiency measure. Just find something you can do more effectively. But, and this is a caveat that's quite important, don't fall into the trap of thinking it's just a tool that you can use to improve what you're doing. It is, but it is going to transform what you do. It is going to transform what your company does. So I would absolutely, if you're looking for a small win, just get in there, experiment with something. And by the way, there is enough stuff out there now, enough good stuff on the internet where people are talking about this that you can find great examples of other people in L&D doing things. And whenever I run a webinar, I always ask people at the beginning, what are you doing with AI in L&D? And great stuff comes up into the chat. So the people out there doing stuff, network with people, read my research, other people's research, you'll see stuff that will stimulate your thinking. But it's not just a tool. The second thing I would say is, what is that business of going out for a quick win, is to go out and talk to the business. AI is transforming how we learn, yes, but also how we work and even how we live. So the work bit, go and talk to the business. How is it using AI? What are people doing that's different in the business? And that will give you a sense of other things that you can do with it. And also, it will be a different conversation than the business is used to having with L&D. You're not talking about training. You're talking about efficiency, doing things better. It may open up new doors that you hadn't thought about before, which actually is what happened in that L&D team in Manchester that I was talking about. So there, that knowledge base is used by the L&D team, but it's also used by now the partners themselves. Everybody in the organization, from the top partners through to the junior people just joining, are quizzing this knowledge base in order to do their work better. And it's become a workplace support, performance support tool, something which you might not have expected. So go out, find out who's using AI for what in your organization, as well as using it for a quick local win.
Yeah, that's a really good example, and I think, that's something that here at Adobe as well, we just talked about, at the Learning Summit conference that we had in Las Vegas. I was on stage, and I got to debut our new learner assistant, technology, and so basically, it's a learner-facing technology that is a chatbot that they interact with, but it is trained on the data that exists within the LMS, so similar to what you're talking about, it's a database for learners that they can query just through natural language to learn about subjects. They don't even have to enroll in the course necessarily. They can just come and ask it questions. So the example we showed on stage was a salesperson needs to pitch a customer about the differences between product version 4 and product version 5. Well, the chatbot came back with the answer, also drafted an email for the customer explaining it that they could easily just copy and paste into the email application of their choice. Like, that's the type of thing that I think is really what you're talking about. You're creating almost like an ecosystem with this that you never really expected to have before. And that ecosystem is, like you said, it's available to customers, it's available to people internally, anybody who has access to that system. And really, it's just a way of making us all more efficient across the board, I feel like.
Justin, it's a really great example, and I'd love to see more about how that's working. And it is using a form of interaction that is a natural way of learning and of performance support. You're just going to ask somebody in the workplace, how do I do something? Well, in this case, the Adobe system's coming back to you and is telling you, well, look, here's my advice. By the way, I've kindly written you an email you can use as well. That's super. Um, that's a that is a great platform. It's a great example of how you can use this stuff. It's a challenge for learning and development, or indeed for anybody, not just L&D, who sees the role of L&D as being solely the creation and the dissemination of courses. Now, that continues to be part of our role, but that's only ever serving the goal of increased performance. And I think we need to focus on that and not let other people or ourselves keep us in a box that says you're all about creating a course, because this gives us what you've just described, gives us great opportunity to step out and do more.
Right. And I think, your data actually shows that, strategy and skills, not necessarily technology, are now some of the biggest challenges that we do face in L&D. So why do you think that conversation is shifting now from tools to talent, so to speak? What's causing that?
No question, no question that you're absolutely right. We're talking about a shift from tools to talent. And the reason it's happening is that people are more important than ever to modern workplaces as being the vessels of value, if you like. They are the parts of an organization that bring the value, bring the differentiation. Whenever you have technology, when you have tools, the tools get company A up to this level, then company B finds out what's going on, catches up, and then they're duking it out at more or less the same level. We see this all the time in the classic cases in wartime when, I don't know, aeroplanes in the First World War get innovated extraordinarily quickly, and the other side catches up, and it's like this. So what happens? Well, what matters is the bit on top, the people. In the case of the First World War, the pilots flying the planes, how good are they? In a commercial sense, what are the people doing on top? And so, yes, there's been fascination with tools, but people are the vessels of value, the thing that makes that last bit the difference between being an also-ran and being a winner. And so that's why the focus is on talent. And at last, the opportunity is there to actually do something about it. I worked in a skills management software company in the early 2000s. We had some leading edge stuff. It was incredibly difficult to do it because we didn't have AI. Now we have AI and a bunch of other stuff, which you can do things with skills that you simply couldn't dream about doing 20 years ago. And I think what's happened is that the mechanism has caught up with the dream. We've always known people are important. They've become increasingly important over time. Now finally we can do something about it. So that's why the talent has overtaken the tools on our radar as being what's important. My question to L&D, my challenge to L&D is, are you ready to step up to this new role? And I would take advantage of the platforms that are available, as you were saying. Justin, there's some great stuff out there. Take advantage of that to do great things, and then that gives you the time and the space to position yourself strategically.
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. Are you ready for the transformation? I think that's ultimately, you see all these people, they talk about it on, platforms like LinkedIn and YouTube. You see these people talking about the AI revolution and all that good stuff. And I totally agree. Like, it has the possibility to be a revolutionary force, but it's only going to be revolutionary to the people who are willing to adapt and change and upskill themselves to get to that point. But when I go out and I talk to people, especially those who come up, the ones who come up to me and are anti AI, that kind of thing. I think it comes down to a lack of skill on their part for using these interfaces, these tools, communicating with these interfaces, whatever it might be. And I just wonder, from your perspective, why is that such a challenge? We seem to have had a pretty fast uptick on other technologies that have quote unquote revolutionized L&D in the past. Online courses and things like that seems to be a pretty natural thing that happened. Why does it still be why is it still a challenge for L&D professionals to become more AI savvy today?
You're right that L&D professionals think there's a skills problem. When we ask people what's your barrier to using AI in L&D, it's the third biggest barrier. And the other two are very human ones. They're about trust and security concerns. So people consider it a barrier. I'm not sure it's more of a barrier than anything else. I think people believe it is, but I think that it's more a question of comfort with AI and a confidence to take risks. So I would say that it's not so much that there's a lack of skill, because honestly, we've had generative AI for 3 years. Nobody really knows very much about it. The bigger stuff in AI, machine learning and so on, is not even on the table. So why are we talking about a lack of skills? I think that people may be unskilled, but that's not the issue. The issue is people aren't comfortable with jumping in and trying things out. That's an absolute must-have, a must-do in the field. You've just got to get your hands dirty, try it out, see what works, what doesn't, and stop doing the stuff that doesn't work. For me, this comes down to a matter of leadership in learning and development. And consistently, with my co-author, Egla Benalskaita, when we look at people, when we look at organizations that are successful and teams that are successful in L&D, it always comes down to having somebody at the helm, leading the L&D team, who has a bunch of characteristics, one of which is they are entrepreneurial. They want to go out and make a difference in their organization. They've got a North Star they're heading towards, which is usually around performance, and they are going to duck and dive and do everything it takes to get to that point. When I describe that sort of L&D leader, it's not something that is traditionally what you think of as an L&D person, which is somebody who does a great job teaching or a great job producing materials. And I think that's why there's a lack of confidence in dealing with AI, is because we don't have enough leaders out there who are helping people develop themselves and driving their people forward to do more with AI. So it is an AI skills issue, but it comes from an important place behind that, which is, for me, leadership.
So let's stick with that leadership thread for just a second and talk about, because one of the things that the leaders are in charge of obviously is bringing a technology stack to the masses at their place of work or to their customers or whoever that might be. So let's talk a little bit about platforms and how AI should fit into the platforms, the modern learning platforms. I work on Adobe Learning Manager, obviously, and so our promise is to empower people, with the ability to embed AI into their daily work, right? We want to remove the friction by making it easier to use, and things like the AI assistant that I just talked about. We have an admin assistant that does the same thing for the administrator side. What do you think the role of the learning platform is in making L&D people more confident and results oriented when they use AI? What role should those platforms play?
I love your use of the word friction there, Justin. I think you're absolutely right. Platforms got to get rid of the friction. If it's introducing friction, and unfortunately we've seen that happen in the past, if it's introducing friction, it doesn't help anybody at all. If it helps individuals do their job better, that's removing friction. And that can be the L&D people, and it can also be the people they're supporting. And I think what we need to do is help people use the right platform for what they need to do, and then understand that their job isn't about learning. Yes, learning is part of what we do, but it's a route to the goal of performance, organizational performance. So let's ensure that we're focused on adapting and using those platforms to help individuals perform better. So when you talk about a salesperson using the Adobe Learning Platform in order to do their job better, that's absolutely something that L&D should be all over. Now, it doesn't sound like a traditionally part of our remit, But we should be all over the idea that here's something which enables people to perform better, the business to perform better. Our job, it's not about learning. Our job is to help those people perform. It is to go out and help people understand how to use that platform as well as possible. So it's a slightly meta approach. It's about not learning how to do your job better, but learning how to use a tool that will help you do your job better. And I think if you've got a good platform, then that should be your approach. Go out and just make sure you're sweating that asset as much as possible for your organization to help it, in your words, take the friction out of their work.
And what level of importance do you put on things like, let's say personalization? Because I think, that's something that we've become spoiled by just our everyday lives. You log into an Amazon and they know what you want to shop for. You log into Netflix, they know what you want to watch. Spotify curates playlists out of thin air because they know what you like. When it comes to learning, do you find in your research or through talking to people that that is something that they are interested in? Do they want us to be responsible for helping surface new information to them?
Well, there's lots of things you're asking there, Justin. One, are they interested? Yes, absolutely. Yes. Personalization is a super hot topic. And, whereas in the past 2 years, everything has taken a hit on the global sentiment survey because AI has sucked up all the votes. So everyone is voting for AI. There are fewer votes to go around, apart from personalization, which is the one thing which has maintained a strong position. So it's absolutely seen as being the thing you want to do with AI. And it means lots of things to different people. So it could be adaptive delivery, it could be giving people individual pathways, and so on. You asked at the end there, do they want us to do it for them? They don't care. They don't care where it comes from. They just want it to be done. They don't even really care about learning because you're absolutely right. We are super spoiled in our daily lives that in a way you couldn't have imagined. I was going to say 20 years ago, 5 years ago, you couldn't have imagined some of the stuff that happens now. And a very minor thing, you get a train, and now my train app tells me what my favorites are and will tell me what the most likely thing I want to find before I'm even looking for it is. It's extraordinary, and we don't even bat an eyelid. People expect that sort of consumer-grade experience when they come to work now. They don't care where it comes from, and they don't really care about the learning. They care about the performance, and they will probably learn over time, but yeah, they want it personalized absolutely for them. So there'll be an initial moment of shock and delight when people get a personalized experience when they're trying to do something. 2 weeks later, that's it. Of course, they expect it, and you've got to go to the next level. But I'm hoping that the platforms you're talking about are going to provide some of this personalization and help people get to where they need to get faster, taking the friction out of learning and removing some of the friction that's stopping them performing. Is that something you're seeing with the platforms you're talking about?
Yeah, definitely. One of the examples that I always cite when I talk to people is Microsoft's Expert Zone website. So you could go to expertzone.microsoft.com and you can sign in using just a regular Microsoft account. You don't have to pay for it or anything. It's one of the better examples of personalization that I've seen, at least from a perspective that before you even get going, before you can see the homepage, part of the registration is what can we help you learn? And it's a box of information that they provide. So, do you want to know more about Office products? Do you own a Surface computer? Do you need help with an Xbox? All these things. And then once you check that box, you go in and your entire homepage is courses, YouTube videos, social information, all of these things that are all corresponding to the things that you've put into that box when you first, sign up for the site. And this is all powered by our platform, Adobe Learning Manager, by the way. It's one of the best examples I've seen of people personalizing at scale. Microsoft uses this system to train customers, to train partners, to train resellers, all of these things. And I use it myself because I'm a lifelong Mac user, have not used PCs in a very long time. And coming to Adobe had to relearn the Office suite. So I was immediately like logging into this site and like, how do I do this in Word? Because I've been using Pages and Keynote for decades, I guess. So that it's an interesting way, I think, to remove the friction of me having to do the content discovery on my own. It's putting things in front of me that I already want to know. And then as I continue, the thing that impressed me most, as I continued down certain rabbit holes, more things started coming up. And then as other people were liking content or completing content like I was, there's a row at the bottom that says trending in your network. So it's like a what's hot on Netflix, but it's for the training. And that kind of thing kind of, got me excited. Like, oh, well, people who, they knew how to do these macros and maybe I should learn how to do macros, that kind of thing. And so that's the type of stuff that I find motivating for me personally. I know that probably doesn't drive everybody's engine the same way. That's why we do other things like gamification and social and all that other stuff. But for me, if you can put stuff in front of me that I care about, that I think is going to move the needle for me in terms of my career, what I'm able to accomplish in my day-to-day work, or even if you outline a path for me to say, if you achieve skill A, B, and C, then you could move into role X. That to me is what personalization it would really mean the world to me, because oftentimes big organizations like a Microsoft or even, Adobe or other places where I've worked, the career path is not always linear and it's not always clear where to go or how to get there. So if these systems could proactively provide us with that information as a learner, I think that would be tremendous.
So much from what you've just said there, Justin. I want to jump on that bit and then come back to the bit about the actual platform itself. But the idea that we now have systems which can combine with talent systems, recruiting systems internally to help people understand that link, which intuitively we know exists between your skill and your knowledge and your job prospects, and does something useful with it. That is just immense. And the bigger the organization, exponentially, the more complicated it gets to try to find your way through the thicket of complicated stuff to see there's an opportunity over there and I can go for it. So the idea that there's a platform out there which can do that is, for me, it's a harbinger of what's to come. You just talked earlier about talent and tools. That's absolutely where we're going to. We're going to the world where the walls between L&D, recruitment, HR, talent break down. Because why? Because that is where the friction is in making sure that people are being as productive as they can be. Well, you don't want friction between those bits. And now, with good AI and the right platforms, you can make it happen. So is that something you've actually seen, Justin, or were you just speculating when you talked about that?
So I've seen it, not in the full realization of what I was just saying. It's mostly now based on things like, for example, in our platform, you can create roles, products, and skills on the back end as an administrator, and you can make those available to learners to say they are interested in those roles, product, or skills. So then you could create, let's say, a triggered learning plan that says if someone is put into this group saying they're interested in this skill, enroll them in this learning plan that would then maybe outline how to get from skill A to skill B. I think there's still some friction to remove from that, obviously, to make that a little bit more seamless. And that's some of the stuff that I think we'll work on in the longer term. But in a rudimentary way, yes, you can create those sort of loops using the tools that we have. The same thing with products. I think that from a customer education standpoint, which is my area of expertise from when I did this as a career, making it easier for people to see how to upskill from one product to the other or how different products fit together is another thing. You think about Adobe, we always have suites of tools, right? But most people come into our suite with one tool in mind. They come in, they're a Photoshop user, or they come in and they use Captivate. They don't necessarily know that all these other apps exist. So what if you could create proactive learning plans that once someone comes in and says they're interested in Photoshop or Adobe Learning Manager or whatever the case may be, well, automatically it says, well, here's how this works with other products in our suite. Take this course now, things like that. So I think, yes, there are ways to achieve some of what I'm talking about, especially through our system. And I think that, over time, it's only going to get better, but that's the level of personalization and frictionless content discovery that I personally want.
And it's going to happen. The business benefit of making this stuff work is so apparent that it will happen. It's a long way from somebody saying, can you help me get the budget for an LMS so I can deliver another course? That's not really tremendous interest. Can you help me get some information to people so they can do their jobs better, faster, and accelerate their progression through the workforce so that the time to competence is less and the recruitment costs are down? Absolutely. Where do I sign my check? Coming back to reflect on something else you said there, Justin, I think is really interesting. This idea that there are platforms out there where this stuff is going to happen in the short term. I'm sure it's going to happen, and even right now are doing really complicated things, like the Microsoft example you gave. If a platform can do these complicated things, I think people who are working in L&D need to ask themselves, how much am I in the tool integration and creation business? How much am I in the finding a good platform and using it to do my job business? And for me, increasingly, it's just find a good tool and use it, because it'll be so much richer than you can imagine that you can get on and then be strategic. And my heart breaks when I see people who are tied up in creation of complicated content, which they don't need to do, and manipulating data using Excel spreadsheets. I love Excel, don't get me wrong, but there are tools out there that can do this stuff for you. So go out and find the platform. And I think the difficulty is a lot of people in L&D, it's all very well me sitting here at my desk in London, pronouncing like this. A lot of people, in fact, everybody I talk to in L&D is overworked. They have no time. And I think that the trick is to try to carve out some time in order to take a step back and think about, how do I do that stuff of removing friction and find the right platform that's going to help me get there? For me, the way you reduce the amount of time that you have to spend on day-to-day jobs is to stop creating content for people who've just phoned you up and said, can I have a course, please? And I think that absorbs an awful lot of time for L&D people. So I'd say, please stop doing that, and please start doing some of the great stuff that Justin is talking about here.
Yeah, I think, but I think that's what makes us a little different too at Adobe, is the way that we approach AI integration with our systems. We try, and even non-AI related things. Reporting is a great example. You mentioned Excel spreadsheets, and this kind of sparked something for me. So when I first got to Adobe and started working on this product, one of the things you had to do in order to view a learner transcript was download an Excel spreadsheet, and then you would either have to open that up and then run it through, something like Power BI or something like that to truly understand what was going on. And I went on a customer visit. I think I could say I went to Domino's Pizza, one of our customers, and one of their main problems was that they have franchises all over, even outside the United States. And they needed a way for store managers and regional managers to be able to look inside of our product and see, did a driver complete the safety course? Did the person who makes the pizza complete the how to make a pizza course? All these things. They needed a bird's eye view of that information. They were having to manually download these Excel spreadsheets, upload them, interpret them. It was taking forever. So we built this thing called the Group Success Dashboard. And basically what that now does is it allows a manager to go in, and it can see up to 50 learners and 50 courses all at once to see where people are through that. And then if you drill down into it, there's another view called Learner Transcript View, which is essentially a distillation of that Excel spreadsheet from before, but in visual format that can show you how far along they are in the path, when they've completed it, or if they've completed it, and all of that. So it gives them instant access to that, and then they can then flip that into a dashboard that is shareable with other managers. So imagine a regional person, they've had an incident, and the incident, maybe the driver got into an accident. Well, they need to report back whether or not that driver has completed that course, so they can instantly share a dashboard back to their headquarters to say, yes, all of my people have completed this. You can see it here in this dashboard. And that's the type of thing that really takes time off of administrators' plates, I think, and really helps remove a lot of the barriers that make, being an L&D admin such a challenge. But, just curious to hear your thoughts on, like, what can we do from even more so from that perspective to help the admin side, because so much of this, we focus on the learner experience, we focus on the creator experience. We don't talk a lot about the admin experience.
It used to be that if you wanted to go across the United States, you'd get a stagecoach and it would take you several days. Now, of course, you can fly, but even going by land, you could, by I think it was 1868. You could get a railroad right the way across the States from one seaboard to the other. And the transformation in people's perception of travel that came from that was extraordinary. We need to create the same sort of transformation perception in people's understanding of data. The idea that, yeah, it's perfectly acceptable to get a stagecoach and it will take you days to get to your destination should be regarded as completely unacceptable. The idea that you can get data and you carry it around, in the old days on a floppy disk, it was called sneakernet. You put an Excel file on a floppy disk, you took it over, and somebody else got it. It's unacceptable. There needs to be a sort of standard of understanding how data gets shared, which leads individuals in L&D teams and managers simply to demand more, because you can do it. There's no question you can do it. The question is, who's got the wherewithal, the budget and the drive to pull things together and do what you did and say, yeah, it's a problem and we can fix it, and I'm going to. In terms of L&D, I always say that the best thing that L&D can do to be more strategic is to go out and have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or a sit down with somebody in marketing and somebody in IT. Those are the people who are going to help you solve problems. And they will help you solve problems that you may not even know you've got, like, yeah, well, of course we have to download this Excel file, we run a couple of macros, we manipulate it, we copy and paste stuff together, do an X lookup, and then you've got your data set. Well, how long does that take you? All that time is honestly wasted time because it could be done automatically. Somebody in IT can help you with it. And on the marketing side, there are other things to learn as well. So I would say, it can be done. That's the frustrating thing. The answer is you've got to have the indignation to go out there and demand change. And managers should be demanding it as well. So Domino's managers probably figured it was a better way of doing it and you solved the problem. I think probably more people around the world should be as indignant and say, no, we deserve better. We shouldn't waste our time on these things.
Totally agree. And I was hearing, as you were saying, I was hearing the echoes of one of my old bosses because he always demanded so much more from every platform that we had. We didn't always get what we needed, unfortunately, but he sure tried. So I wanna round us home here with a very open-ended question about the future of AI and learning. This is always everybody's biggest question that everybody wants to know. So if you could give every L&D leader one piece of advice. We've gotten lots throughout this conversation, so I appreciate that. But one piece of advice as they prepare for AI's next chapter. So there may be two questions in here. A, what is the next chapter? And B, what would it be? What would your one piece of advice be to an L&D leader today?
This is not new, but it's been galvanized by what's happened with AI. And my one piece of advice is to stop focusing on content. Now, that's a negative. So the question is, well, what do I do if I don't focus on that? And the reason you don't focus on it is that content in an AI, in a generative AI world, is no longer a differentiator. There is a sea of content, and there are lots of people in your organization currently producing stuff that you might call learning content. So whatever you produce is not a differentiator for the L&D department. So there's a very good commercial reason for not focusing on content, because if you do that, you're spending your time on something which may not help you lift your head up and show that L&D can deliver. Now, that doesn't mean content isn't important. It is. You have to create great content that's geared towards a performance need. But if that's all that you're doing, then you are running the risk of obsolescence in the future. And so you might say, well, where are we going? That's the second question. And I think where are we going? We're going towards one of three futures. And the futures which I think we're going towards are that L&D is focused on being a centralized skill authority. So it understands how people learn, it understands how to get people the skills they need, and it makes skills the language of business. It treats skills as a resource that's critical for the business, and the business understands that. That's one future. Another future is a decentralized approach where you're looking at enabling people in the business to share what they know. And, fast food is one example. Hospitality, hotels is another, where there might be somebody in Sydney who comes across a great way of doing something in a hotel chain, and then you want to help them understand how to articulate that. So get it down in some form of content and then share it across the organization. That's a content approach, if you like, but it's very different from creating that centrally. So to find out the great stuff that people are doing wherever they are in the organization and sharing it, that's what we call being an enablement partner. So you could be a skills authority, you could be an enablement partner, but the third alternative for the future is something that Egler and I have come up with, is the adaptation engine, something where L&D doesn't exist anymore as a separate entity, but is part of a squad or a team approach that goes out and looks at performance problems and tackles those performance problems in terms of whatever is needed. So it could be, we need a talent approach here, we need a recruitment approach, we need a change to the employee value proposition, we need a compensation approach, we need a learning approach, we need new management, whatever. And we need a systems approach to how people do their work, and they fix the performance problem that way, with learning as being one part of that. All of these things will require content in some form, but it's not the starting point. It's a means to an end. So I'd say, just to recap there, where I see us going in the future and where I see people already going, being skills authority in the center, being an enablement partner, helping people share what they already know and boosting the performance of the organization that way, or being part of a squad as an adaptation engine that goes out and tackles performance problems where they come up locally or strategically to make the business perform better.
I honestly did not expect such a poignant answer. That was amazing. Like, those make so much sense to me, and I think that that's very good advice for people to keep an eye on, and to really think about where they need to go in this new AI enabled world. That's how I like to frame it. It's an AI enabled world. It's not an AI, it's not a human versus AI kind of thing. It's a AI plus human kind of thing, and it's something we all have to kind of get used to, and it's a very exciting future if you allow it to be. So, Donald, thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciate it. I think that we've gotten some really great insights and had a great chat today. So thank you so much for joining us in our series, and let everybody know where they can find out more about what you do.
If you go to donaldhtaylor.co.uk, that's the website with everything on it. But I want to echo what you said there, Justin. This is a time not for fear, but excitement. There's so much possibility out there. Let's seize the opportunities and make L&D what it really can be in organizations today.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you folks for joining us. I really appreciate it. Again, I'm Justin Seeley. He's Donald H. Taylor. Both of us are available on LinkedIn if you ever want to connect with us. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.